The glass tower on 5th and Madison stood 42 stories tall, housing 3 different corporations, 2 law firms, and more ambition than most cities contain in their entirety. By day, it hummed with the energy of deals being made and careers being built. By night, it belonged to Marcus Webb. At 67 years old, Marcus had been the night security guard at the Preston Building for almost 8 years. He arrived every evening at exactly 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes before his shift officially began, and he left at 7:15 a.m., 15 minutes after it ended. In between, he walked the same routes, checked the same doors, and existed in the same comfortable invisibility that most night shift workers know well. The daytime employees barely registered his existence. To them, he was just part of the building's infrastructure, like the elevators or the air conditioning, functional, forgettable, and utterly unremarkable. They would rush past him in the lobby during those overlap minutes when day met night, focus on their phones, their conversations, their important lives. Marcus would nod, offer a quiet evening that rarely received a response, and continue his rounds. He wore the standard uniform, navy blue pants, light blue shirt, black tie, and a jacket that had his name embroidered over the pocket. His salt and pepper hair was always neatly combed, his shoes always polished, and his posture always straight despite the years. There was a certain dignity in how he carried himself, though no one seemed to notice that either. The building manager, Todd Brennan, a man in his 30s who had inherited his position through family connections rather than competence, treated Marcus with a casual dismissiveness reserved for those he considered beneath him. Their interactions were brief and transactional. "Make sure you're checking the executive floor properly," Todd would say, not looking up from his phone. "We've had complaints about the temperature." "Yes, sir," Marcus would respond. "I'll monitor it." "And the bathroom's on 12. Someone said they smelled weird last week. I'll check them personally." Todd never asked about Marcus's well-being, never inquired about his life outside these walls, never considered that the man standing before him might have a history worth knowing. And Marcus never volunteered information. He had learned long ago that most people weren't actually interested in the answers to questions they didn't ask. The truth was, Marcus preferred the invisibility. After the life he'd lived before, the intensity, the constant vigilance, the weight of decisions where seconds meant the difference between life and death, there was something almost meditative about the predictability of night security work. Walk the floors, check the locks, monitor the cameras, exist in the quiet spaces between other people's emergencies. His routine was precise. At 11 p.m., he would begin on the ground floor, checking that all public entrances were secured. By 11:30, he would be on floors 3 through 15, using the stairwells rather than the elevator, maintaining the physical conditioning that decades of habit had made automatic. By 1 a.m., he would reach the executive floors, 38 through 42, where the real money lived in the form of corner offices and mahogany furniture. At 2 a.m., he would take his break in the small security office on the ground floor, eating whatever simple meal he had packed, usually a sandwich and an apple, while reviewing the camera feeds. By 2:30 a.m., he would begin the cycle again, this second round more cursory but no less thorough. The building was different at night. During the day, it was all performance and posturing, everyone playing their role in the corporate theater. At night, it was honest. The silence revealed what the building actually was, just concrete and steel and glass, impressive but ultimately empty of the meaning people try to pour into it during business hours. Marcus had made a few small connections over the years with a handful of people who worked late or arrived early. There was Dr. Sarah Chun, a research analyst on the 23rd floor, who often worked until midnight, driven by deadlines that seemed to perpetually chase her. She always said hello, always asked how his evening was going, and seemed to actually listen to his responses. There was James, the cleaning crew supervisor, a man in his 50s from Trinidad who had a laugh that could fill a room and stories about his grandchildren that Marcus genuinely enjoyed. They would sometimes share coffee around 3 a.m., 2 men whose work happened in the margins of other people's lives. And there was Lily Martinez, a young lawyer who often arrived at 5 a.m. to work on cases before the office filled with distractions. She had once asked Marcus about the photograph he kept on his desk in the security office, a picture of him in his younger years, though she couldn't quite place the context. He had deflected gently, and she had respected his privacy. But these connections were surface level, friendly but not intimate. No one knew about the 25 years Marcus had spent in the LAPD SWAT division. No one knew about his specialty in hostage negotiation, or about the 43 situations he had successfully resolved without loss of life. No one knew about the 3 times things had gone wrong, about the faces that still visited him in dreams, about the weight of decisions made in fractions of seconds. No one knew about the final incident, the warehouse situation that had ended with a young woman dead despite everything Marcus had tried, despite his experience and his training, and his absolute commitment to bringing everyone home alive. The review board had cleared him of wrongdoing. The media had called him a hero, but Marcus knew the truth. He had miscalculated, misread the situation by just a few seconds, and someone's daughter had paid the price. He had retired 6 months later at 59, with full honors and a pension. And he had spent the next year trying to figure out how to live in a world where the stakes were no longer life and death, where his skills were no longer needed, where the adrenaline and purpose that had defined him for decades were suddenly completely absent. The night security job had been his wife Carol's idea. "You need structure," she had said. "You need to feel useful. But, Marcus, you also need to not carry the weight of the world anymore. Maybe this is that balance." She had been right, as she usually was. Carol, who had stood by him through 25 years of missed dinners and middle-of-the-night calls and the quiet PTSD that he tried to hide, but she always saw. Carol, who had died 2 years ago from cancer, leaving Marcus with a paid-off house that felt too big and a future that felt too empty. The night security job gave him structure without stakes, responsibility without trauma, purpose without pain. And for 8 years, it had been exactly what he needed, until the night of October 17th, when everything changed. Marcus was on the 38th floor at 1:47 a.m. when he heard the sound that didn't belong. It was subtle, a metallic scraping that lasted less than 2 seconds, but his training registered it immediately. Someone was forcing entry on the ground floor East Service entrance. He moved to the nearest window and looked down. A white van was parked in the loading zone, rear doors open. As he watched, 2 figures in dark clothing slipped into the building through the service entrance. A third figure remained by the van, keeping watch. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed 911 with the calm precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. The operator answered on the second ring. "This is Marcus Webb, night security at the Preston Building, 1247 5th Avenue. I have a break-in in progress. East Service entrance. At least 3 suspects, 1 vehicle, white cargo van, license plate." He recited the numbers he had memorized in those few seconds of observation. "I need police response immediately. Units are being dispatched," the operator said. "Can you provide more information about the suspects?" 2 suspects now inside the building, 1 remaining with the vehicle. All appear to be male, average build, dark clothing. "I'm going to maintain visual contact through security cameras." "Sir, do not engage. The officers will be there in approximately 8 minutes. "Understood," Marcus said, but he was already moving toward the stairwell. 8 minutes was an eternity in a situation like this. 8 minutes was time for people to get hurt. He descended the stairs with controlled speed, his body falling into movement patterns that decades of training had made instinctive. His mind was already working through the variables. 2 suspects inside, possibly armed, 1 outside as a lookout. The building was mostly empty, but not entirely. Dr. Chin was likely still on 23, and the cleaning crew would be on the upper floors by now. Marcus reached the security office on the ground floor and quickly scanned the camera feeds. The 2 intruders were in the main lobby now, and his assessment solidified immediately. Professionals, not amateurs. They moved with purpose and coordination, one heading toward the elevator banks, while the other approached the building directory. Then he saw what made his blood run cold. One of them was carrying not just a weapon, but an AR-15 style rifle. The other had what appeared to be a shotgun. This wasn't a simple burglary. This was something much worse. Marcus opened the locked drawer beneath his desk and pulled out the equipment he had kept there for years but hoped never to need. His old LAPD badge, a set of zip-tie restraints, and a small tactical flashlight. The security company didn't authorize guards to carry weapons. And Marcus had never argued with that policy, but he had also never stopped being prepared. He watched the monitors as the two men split up. One stayed in the lobby, positioning himself near the main entrance, a blocking position. The other moved toward the elevators. They were establishing control of the building. Marcus picked up his radio and switched to the frequency used by the cleaning crew. "James, this is Marcus. Do not respond verbally, but if you can hear me, press your talk button twice." 2 clicks came through immediately. "There are armed intruders in the building. I need you to get everyone on your crew into a secure room immediately. Lock the door, stay quiet, and wait for police. Press twice if you understand." 2 clicks. "Good. Stay safe, James." He switched to the building's emergency frequency and did the same with Dr. Chun, who he knew often kept her radio on while working late. She confirmed the same way, and Marcus felt a small measure of relief. The civilians were aware and securing themselves. Now he had to manage the situation until police arrived. 7 minutes, based on his call. He looked at the monitors again. The man in the lobby was pacing, agitated. The one who had gone to the elevators was now coming back down the stairwell on the north side. They had checked whether the elevators were being monitored. These weren't random thieves. They had training, or at least planning, which meant they also had a specific objective. Marcus's mind ran through scenarios. The Preston Building housed several high-value tenants, a law firm that handled major corporate cases, a wealth management company, and on the top floors, the headquarters of Meridian Tech, a company that had recently been in the news for developing proprietary data systems. Data, that's what they were here for. Corporate espionage, made physical. The man from the stairwell rejoined his partner in the lobby. They had a brief conversation Marcus couldn't hear. Then both moved toward the north stairwell with clear purpose. They were going up, probably toward the Meridian Tech floors, which meant they would pass right by the floors where Dr. Chun and the cleaning crew were hiding. Marcus made a decision. He couldn't let them get to those floors. Not with those weapons. Not with innocent people in the building. He left the security office and moved toward the lobby with the kind of controlled calm that came from years of walking into dangerous situations. His heart rate was elevated but steady. His breathing was measured. His mind was clear. When he stepped into the lobby, both men were at the stairwell door. They turned at the sound of his footsteps, and Marcus saw them register him the same way everyone did. Just an old security guard, no threat, barely worth noticing. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the marble floor with quiet authority. "The police have been called. They'll be here in about 6 minutes. I'd suggest you leave now while you still can." The taller of the 2 men, the one with the rifle, actually laughed. "Old man, you need to go back to your desk and forget you saw us. This doesn't concern you." "I'm afraid it does," Marcus said. "This is my building during these hours. These people are my responsibility." The second man, stockier and clearly more aggressive, raised his shotgun slightly. "Do you see what we're carrying? You see this? You need to shut up and sit down before you get hurt." Marcus didn't move. His eyes were doing what they always did in these situations. Reading body language, assessing threat levels, calculating distances and angles. The tall one was nervous despite his laugh. Finger near the trigger, but not on it. Dangerous but controllable. The stocky one was trying to project dominance through aggression, but his grip on the shotgun was too tight. Stance too rigid. Scared. Also dangerous, but differently so. "I can see exactly what you're carrying," Marcus said evenly. "And I can see you're both smart enough to know that using those weapons changes this from a burglary to something much worse. Right now, you can still walk away. 6 minutes from now, that option disappears." "You got a death wish, old man?" The stocky one stepped forward. And that's when Marcus saw it. The third man, the lookout from outside, was now coming to the main entrance behind him. He caught the reflection in the polished floor before he heard the footsteps. The situation had just become more complicated. Marcus turned slightly, enough to keep all 3 men in his peripheral vision, positioning himself at an angle that was tactically optimal but appeared casual. Years of training had taught him that in situations like this, perception mattered as much as reality. "You brought 3 people for this job," Marcus observed. Professional crew, planned operation, which means you've done this before and you know how it works. You know the window is closing. You know every second you spend here increases your risk. The third man, who appeared to be the leader based on how the other two looked at him, was older than his partners, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of cold assessment in his eyes that Marcus recognized immediately. This one had been in combat. This one was genuinely dangerous. "You're not a normal security guard," the leader said. It wasn't a question. "I'm whatever I need to be," Marcus replied. "And right now, I'm the person standing between you and those stairs." 5 minutes until police arrival. The leader studied him for a long moment, and Marcus saw the calculation happening. This man knew how to read situations, knew how to assess risk. He was weighing options. "Marcus," the leader said, and Marcus felt a small jolt at hearing his name. "I read your badge. Your former law enforcement. Swat, I'm guessing, based on how you're standing, how you positioned yourself to maintain visual on all of us." 25 years, Marcus confirmed. There was no point in lying. "Then you know we're not leaving without what we came for. And you know you can't stop 3 armed men by yourself. Be smart. Sit this one out." "Can't do that," Marcus said simply. The stocky one was getting more agitated. "Derek, just shoot him. We don't have time for this." But Derek, the leader, held up a hand. "How do you want this to go, Marcus?" "I want you to leave. Now, you take your crew, get in that van, and disappear before this becomes something you can't take back. And if we don't—" Marcus's voice dropped, taking on a quality that anyone who had heard him negotiate before would have recognized immediately. "Then we have a problem, because I know you can shoot me. You probably will if you have to. But Derek, you also know what happens next. You know that gunfire brings police faster. You know that using those weapons against a security guard, especially one with my background, means every cop in the city will be looking for you. And you know that whatever you came here to steal isn't worth that kind of heat." Derek's jaw tightened. He knew Marcus was right, but the stocky one had reached his limit. "I'm done with this," he said, and moved toward Marcus with the shotgun raised. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but Marcus experienced it in the stretched time clarity that combat veterans know well. He stepped inside the shotgun's range before the stocky man could bring it fully to bear, his left hand deflecting the barrel, while his right drove a precise strike to the man's solar plexus. The shotgun clattered to the marble floor as the stocky man doubled over, gasping. Marcus swept the weapon away with his foot while maintaining his position between the other 2 men and the disabled attacker. His hands were up non-threatening, but his body was coiled and ready. "For minutes," Marcus said calmly, as if nothing had happened. "Derek, you're a professional. You know when a job has gone bad. This one has. Take your people and leave while you still can." Derek's rifle was now aimed at Marcus's chest, and the tall, nervous one had his weapon raised as well. Marcus had successfully disarmed one threat, but he had also escalated the situation to a critical point. "You just assaulted my crew member," Derek said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He advanced on me with a weapon," Marcus corrected. "I defended myself. That's all any camera will show." "Derek, 3 minutes. Think about your next move very carefully." Marcus could see it in Derek's eyes. The warrior's calculus. Pride versus pragmatism. The desire for violence versus the reality of consequences. This was the moment everything balanced on. Then Derek smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "You got skills, old man. I respect that. But here's the thing. We're not leaving without our objective. So you've got 2 choices. You can let us go upstairs, do our business, and leave, or you can try to stop us, and we all know how that ends." Marcus's mind was racing through options. The police would arrive in approximately 3 minutes. He had successfully delayed the crew and prevented them from accessing the upper floors. But he had also put himself in a position where these men might decide he was too much of a threat to leave alive. He thought about Carol, about what she would say as she could see him now, about whether this building, these strangers working late, were worth dying for, about whether he had survived 25 years of SWAT operations just to get shot in a corporate lobby at 67. But he also thought about Dr. Chun, on the 23rd floor, about James and his crew, about the responsibility he had accepted when he took this job, even if everyone else thought it was just about checking doors and watching cameras. "Derek," Marcus said quietly, "I'm not letting you go up those stairs. That's not a negotiation. That's a statement of fact." Derek's eyes hardened. His finger moved to the trigger, and then the sound of sirens cut through the night. The effect was immediate. All three men stiffened, their attention splitting between Marcus and the approaching police. The tall, nervous one looked to Derek with panic evident in his body language. "They're early," the tall one said. "We need to go now." Derek's rifle was still trained on Marcus, but his tactical mind was clearly running through scenarios. Stay and fight the police? Impossible. Execute Marcus and run? Possible, but the gunshot would pinpoint their location. Try to escape without further violence? The only real option. "You win this round, old man," Derek said, already backing toward the main entrance. "But you should have stayed out of it." Marcus didn't respond. He simply maintained his position, hands visible but ready, as the three men retreated toward the entrance. The stocky one, still wheezing, was being half carried by a partner. They disappeared into the night just as the first police cruiser pulled up outside, lights blazing but sirens now silent. Marcus stood in the center of the lobby, his heart rate finally beginning to slow as officers poured through the doors. What followed was controlled chaos. Officers securing the building, detectives arriving, statements being taken. Marcus provided a detailed description of the suspects and their vehicle, professional and precise. He demonstrated on camera footage how the situation had unfolded, explaining his decisions with the calm clarity of someone who had debriefed countless operations. Detective Lisa Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had seen enough to recognize competence when she saw it, pulled Marcus aside after the initial statements were taken. "Mr. Webb," she said, "you mind telling me where a security guard learns to disarm someone that cleanly?" Marcus met her eyes. "I was LAPD SWAT for 25 years. Hostage negotiation specialist." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "And you're working night security now?" "Retirement didn't suit me. I needed structure." "Structure," she repeated, a note of irony in her voice. "You engaged 3 armed suspects alone in a situation where you could have stayed in your office and waited for us. There were people in this building. They were my responsibility." Morrison studied him for a moment. "Your actions tonight may have saved lives. Those men had the firepower to do serious harm if they'd made it to the upper floors. You prevented that." "I just did my job," Marcus said. "No," Morrison corrected gently. "You did a lot more than that." As dawn began to break over the city, the building slowly returned to normal. The cleaning crew was released from their secure location, with James embracing Marcus, so hard he nearly cracked a rib. Dr. Chun came down from her floor, pale but composed, and thanked him with tears in her eyes. Todd Brennan, the building manager, arrived at 7 a.m. to find his lobby full of police, and his night security guard being treated like a hero. His expression was a mixture of confusion and something that might have been the first stirrings of respect. "Marcus," he said, for once making eye contact, I had no idea. Your background, your training. You never mentioned. You never asked." Marcus said simply, without accusation. It was just a fact. By the time Marcus's shift officially ended at 7:15 a.m., the story was already spreading through the building. The old night guard nobody noticed had taken on armed intruders, had protected everyone in the building, had shown skills and courage that belied his quiet demeanor. Marcus packed up his things from the security office, preparing to go home to his empty house and try to sleep despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. But before he could leave, Dr. Chin appeared with James and several others who had heard what happened. "Marcus," Dr. Chin said, "we all just wanted to say, we see you now, and we're grateful, not just for what you did tonight, but for every night you've been keeping us safe while we focus on our work and ignored you." Marcus felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "I appreciate that, but I was just—" "Don't say you were just doing your job," James interrupted with his usual directness. "My friend, you put yourself between us and danger. That's not in the job description. That's character. As Marcus finally left the building that morning, stepping out into the sunrise, he thought about Carol, about how she would have smiled at all of this, would have said something about how he could never really stop being who he was, no matter what uniform he wore. He thought about the 25 years of high-stakes operations, the faces he'd saved and the ones he'd lost, about the young woman in the warehouse whose death had driven him into retirement, about whether tonight had been redemption or just continuation. Mostly, he thought about how for 8 years he had existed in comfortable invisibility, content to be overlooked and underestimated, and how in 12 minutes on an October night, that invisibility had shattered, revealing what had been there all along. The Preston Building would have a new night security guard within the week. Marcus was offered a significant promotion to head of security for the entire company, a position he accepted after calling Carol's sister to tell her about the irony of it all. But the real change wasn't in his title or his salary. It was in how people saw him now, and more importantly, in how he saw himself. For 8 years, Marcus Webb had been hiding from the weight of his past, seeking peace in routine and invisibility. But that night reminded him that some things don't disappear just because you stop using them. Skills remain, training persists, and character, when tested, reveals itself regardless of what uniform you're wearing or how invisible you try to become. He was 67 years old. He was a widower working night security. And he was still, after everything, exactly who he had always been. Someone who stepped forward when others needed protecting. That truth, he realized as he drove home through the morning traffic, was something he had needed to remember. The old night guard nobody noticed had become visible at exactly the moment he needed to be. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone, including himself, that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate the quiet ones who have nothing left to prove.